Recourse. Alternatively, you can email your thoughts to rights@recourse@sabc.co.za. During his January 8th statement, the president of the ANC, Cyril Ramaphosa, said, I quote, "Conference resolved that the ANC should, as a matter of policy, pursue expropriation of land without compensation. This should be pursued without destabilizing the agricultural sector, without endangering food security in our country, and without undermining economic growth and job creation." Close quote. Section 25 of the Constitution allows for land to be expropriated for a public purpose or in the public interest. The definition of public interest includes the nation's commitment to land reform and to bring about equitable access to South Africa's natural resources. The clause sets out the terms just and equitable for compensating owners of land earmarked for expropriation. Most significantly, Section 25 provides that property is not limited to land. Section 25 also provides for land reform through restitution and redistribution. It does this by enabling a person or community whose tenure of land is insecure as a result of past racially discriminatory laws or practices to tenure as that is legally secure, or of comparable redress as provided for in legislation. Today on Rights and Recourse, we ask the questions: would land expropriation without compensation speed up the process? Would it master constitutional scrutiny, or should we brace ourselves for endless litigation? But first, let's have a look at this insert.
In the last 23 years, we have not seen the type of progress that we want to see on the land issue, on the redistribution of land and getting our people back to the land. In this conference, we decided that we are now going to return the land to our people. We are going to expropriate land without compensation. We are going to make sure that our people get land and they get back to the land. We also said, and this is precisely, this revolves around the key issues you always articulate. We also said that this must be based on looking at the economic activity in our country, that as we take land, we do not harm the economy, we do not harm agricultural production, and we do not sacrifice food security.
While away, the president of the ANC there, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, explaining the new policy of the ANC with regard to land redistribution and restitution. Our guests for this afternoon to discuss this topic were joined in our Portsmouth studio by Mr. Thozamile Gwanya, CEO of the Eastern Cape Rural Development Agency, and from our Pretoria studio, Mr. Benny van Zyl, General Manager of the Transvaal Agricultural Union of South Africa. General, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse. I was wondering whether you can hear me. Okay, good afternoon. But let me first start, Thozi, with this question. Even though land was dispossessed long before 1913, why did we have to start claiming from 1913?
Yeah, it was considered that 1913 is an important date in that the land law at that time was dispossessing land from black people. It was a racial practice. So it was considered then that it was reasonable to restore land which was dispossessed as a result of racial discrimination.
Benny, do we accept in the Transvaal Agricultural Union that yes, black people were dispossessed of land, therefore there's a need for land redistribution?
Yes, if any person, and we agree that if you apply the law and a person is taken away from the land because of a political decision, then there should be compensation, or he should get the land back, or he should get other land. That's what the law implies, and you have to do that. But I think this is a very complicated issue because There are so many stories going around and things are saying about the history of land that this is much more complicated than to make it simplistic. And I think that somewhere perhaps a lot of people should go and sit down and make sure that we agree upon the history of the land ownership of South Africa. But as the law stands, we apply to that. We haven't got a choice and we agree upon that.
The other thing that's a little bit concerning, I can understand that you are not constitutional experts, but I want to ask this question. How will the policy of expropriation of land without compensation be implemented in a country that is a constitutional democracy?
Yeah, let me start by saying that the premise of expropriation without compensation is probably based on the view that a lot of land was given as a grant to most of the current landowners who are white. So because they were given land as a grant, it is considered to be unreasonable to pay for that land when in fact they got that land as a grant.
Benny, is that so? You got the land as a grant?
Now, I would very much like to talk this out with Tozy because I'm not so sure if that fact is correct. As long as I do understand that there was, in certain cases, that people was offered land way back. After the war, certain war veterans get land, something like that. But in total, I think that almost all the land at this stage was by people, or their ancestors have buy that land. That was the principle. They get title deed, and then yes, their children can inherit it from them. But I don't think that there was a huge grant principle way back. That's not something in my history that's written up, but we have to check that out.
But Josie, the other question for me is, during my research, I went back and I revisited the policy document of the ANC before the policy conference. I could not find anything that is making reference to expropriation without compensation. Or is this a new thing that crept into the elective conference?
I do not represent the ANC in this, nor the government. What I know is that in the existing legislation, there is provision for deducting from the amount payable for expropriation any amount which was a grant to those people. In the formula, there is a deduction that has to be made. That formula also provides that if the government had paid any money as an investment that it has made towards the farm, when you expropriate that farm, you must deduct that amount which was the investment by government. So there is a provision for deduction of the amounts that were paid by government when you calculate the amount payable for compensation. So the issue of no compensation, I believe that it should be based on the fact that those people who got the land did not pay for the land, were given land as a grant. There were a lot of deed of grant. But as I see it, if you were going to enforce the law of no compensation, the one who implements that legislation would have the duty to prove in court that indeed there was a grant for that land. In the absence of that, the current provision of the Constitution is that there will be no arbitrary deprivation of property. So if you are going to expropriate, the current Constitution says that you will have to pay. So you would have to amend the Constitution to delete the clause that talks about there will be no arbitrary deprivation of the land. So that clause in the Constitution would have to be amended. Secondly, Section 25(2) of the Constitution provides for compensation. So you would have to amend that. You amend it by giving detail. Are you saying, as the state, there will be no compensation for those who received the grant? But what about those who paid for the land?
The question,
so if you are going to say that you are not going to pay,
I notice
who have.
I notice in the
Yes,
my apologies for that. I notice in the submission you made to the ANC, you actually put all of these things under, you actually explain everything, but then you say, Section 25(1), no one may be deprived of property except in terms of law of general application. No law may permit arbitrary deprivation of property. You say it would make the expropriation legislation almost impossible. On what do you base that?
No, I'm saying if you do not amend the Constitution, what is fundamental, and I think when I was observing the discussions in the ANC policy debate, they are saying that the policy needs to be amended. And I'm saying that if the Constitution is not amended, this expropriation without compensation may not be possible. But if you are going to amend the Constitution to provide for it, then it will be possible.
Let's hear Benny. Benny, the Constitution does not necessarily preclude expropriation. It doesn't prohibit expropriation, but it says for public interests. What do you understand that to mean?
Sorry, the last part of your question was not here by me. But if you look into the Constitution, and it said there in sub number 2 of 25 that when there's expropriation, there should be compensation. And now the ANC, as I do understand it, was from the KwaZulu-Natal sector of them make this proposal to their conference in December at Nasrec, and there they make this decision that yes, policy within the ANC will be in the future be expropriation without compensation. But there's a lot more to say about this. At this stage, that is only ANC policy. It's not yet government policy. And a lot of things have to be done to make sure that we have to stop this, because that will be devastating for this country. You can realize if you put into a country the principle that in anything that you can invest in that country can be taken away from you without compensation, why will any person come and make any investment in this country? And we have a huge poverty and unemployment problem in this country, and the only way we can address that is by means of economical growth, and that starts with investment. People should have the confidence in this country to come and invest. And with this type of thing that they apply now, and they create this uncertainty at the investors, but they create these expectations with the people that want land, that became a big problem. And as we look into the restitution process, by their own admittance, 90% of all the land that is transferred go out of production. And South Africa is a marginal country regarding food and agricultural situation. So it's very important that we make sure that we utilize our land on an optimal basis to make sure it's sustainable, it's profitable, so that we can do it next year again and again. 67% of our population is urbanized. We have to produce food on the farms for them, and we cannot allow that something go out of production. And it doesn't matter if a farmer is a black farmer or white farmer, man or woman, that's not the issue. The issue is that we have to make sure what principles are we going to apply to make sure that we can produce food on the land. And this announcement brings some big uncertainty for anybody to build this country for the future.
Because one of the questions I wanted to ask was a question around the issue of one of the issues that is being mentioned by people who say there must be expropriation without compensation. They say the process is too cumbersome, takes too long. What are the issues in the process, in the system, in the value chain that causes this to take so long to meet and finalize?
Yeah, you see, these are just administrative processes. You will appreciate that when you are doing any land transaction, it takes longer. It's not like an over-the-counter transaction. There are so many other steps that you have to take when you do a land transaction. With land reform, there are a number of parties, like the current landowners from whom you must take land, and the beneficiaries who must take that land over. So all of those processes take longer. But we must be under no illusion that expropriation may be a faster process itself, because there are many arguments there. There are many disagreements about the market price. The land price has always been a key problem in the implementation of land reform. In my view, expropriation can fast-track land reform. But the issue of costs, the costs for land reform, have been the problem in implementing land reform in South Africa.
Mr.
We have
Fonseca,
tried as the country to...
No, go ahead.
Yeah, we have tried to appoint the office of the Valuer General in order to deal with the issue of the land prices that seem to be exorbitant, which makes land reform very expensive. But that office of the land valuer has no teeth. It is still subjected to the rules of the Constitution. The Valuer General cannot prescribe the price. He has no last say in the price. So I think we must enact it. One of the challenges in the Constitution is that you are not able to put a price ceiling. The Constitution says that it will be based on the market.
Let's start from Mr. Fonseca. Mr. Fonseca, how do the farmers see land redistribution taking place and land restitution? What is the view of the Transvaal Agricultural Union?
I'm very sorry, the last part of your question, every time I don't hear, but let me answer it like this. If you want to expropriate land from a farmer without compensation, there will for sure be huge legal actions taken. There's no farmer at present that was any time in his life be in a position that he can steal land. And in any case, you cannot steal land, but that's not the issue now. So he have done nothing wrong. He's a producer of food for this country, and he make a contribution to the economy. And now people want to take away his land. What did he do wrong? And I think that's the wrong way to go. People will not invest in agriculture anymore. And agriculture is a very high technical process. You have to be on top of anything in the world markets to make sure that you are still profitable, competitive, that you can produce food, because the research and the ongoing processes is very, very fast. And if you are not competitive, you will be not there anymore tomorrow. And where are we going to get food?
And add climate change to that.
If government... Sorry?
And add climate change to that.
Sorry, asking. And yeah, you can add that as well. And this present drought, that's part of that. They have huge challenges in the agricultural sector. And farmers now asking us the question, is it still worthwhile for them to invest in their own farms because of this policy change that is now on the horizon? Will that be implemented or not? And that is for us not a very good thing to do. I disagree with Tozy on this point. I don't think that's the way to go. We from TAU-SA way back in 2005 make a proposal to government how they can get their goals within 8 years without break down any trust within the system. We put it down on a manner that the new entries, we will help them, all the role players will help them, but the principle is they should get title deed. We work on a finance plan, on a support plan, anything, but government sweep it from the table. Why? At this stage, how many people get title deeds if government do the restitution process? They are not honest with their own people, and that's one of the big problems. Any farmer have to make use of his land as a collateral to get finance. At this stage, there's almost 160 billion rand debt in the farming sector that the banks and the land bank themselves make this contribution for farmers to produce. Every year they have to borrow that money to make sure that they go into production. What will happen to that? If you expropriate, what will happen to the banks? This is just not on the table. There's no way any country can go this road. You will take food production out of the line, and that is not for the best of any country. I think the biggest asset this country do have is a commercial farmer producing food, because our country is busy on a huge speed being urbanized. More than 67% of our population is already urbanized. We have to produce food for those people. What will happen if the people don't get food, if it's not available anymore? We have to make sure black, white farmers doesn't matter, and there's good commercial farmers black, and we support them, and we think that's the way to go. If the government can look into our proposal, and other organizations have already made also proposals that can solve this problem without breaking down the trust of investment. If you do that, there's a future for agriculture. But if government go this route, it will be devastating for every role player. We at the end will divide the poverty that they are going to create.
Well, if you'd like to join in today's discussion, you can tweet us at Recourse. Alternatively, you can email us to Recourse. You can also call us on 011-714-5498 or 5497 and share your views on this issue of compensation without, expropriation without compensation. Stay with us.
So the issue of waves is that don't underestimate yourself. You are exactly the cornerstone of the solutions we are looking for.
To go and intervene and make sure that people respect the Constitution.
Now, if drug dealers are paying political leaders, then you will never get rid of that problem.
We need to see detail that we will not see further bailouts.
Fidel, a towering figure of the 20th century.
Stay tuned to PM News for all your news updates every Saturday and Sunday from 1500 hours.
Land expropriation, a contentious issue for South Africans. On the one hand, people say it will accelerate land reform, while on the other, they fear it will chase away potential investors and thus cripple food production.
The risks are partly about foreign investment, foreign capital, feeling that their property rights are not secure, but also the property rights of the commercial farmers who produce 95% of the marketed food in this country.
Professor Cousins says the ANC's resolution on expropriation is irrelevant. He wants the ruling party to focus on improving efficiencies, eliminating corruption, and increasing the budget for land reform. ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa has emphasized that the law would not work to the detriment of the economy and food production. The implementation of the policy will require a 2/3 majority to amend the constitution. This means the ANC will need the help of other parties to achieve the threshold of 66%.
Once the constitution is changed, that doesn't automatically change the law dealing with expropriation. You still have to change the expropriation law, which would allow for expropriation in a certain way. It will have to provide for certain criteria, otherwise it will be an infringement of the rule of law. So you have to still have some criteria for when do you expropriate.
The length of the entire process to pass an expropriation law will depend largely on the public participation process.
Well, our reporter there, Bulelani Philip from Cape Town, talking to us about that subject, expropriation without compensation. Mr. Gwanya, let me come back to you. Is the issue of people must get title deeds, and many people have actually voiced their dissatisfaction with what is going on farms that have been given to people and nothing happens on the farm. There's no productivity happening in those farms. Why should we continue with this thing if there's no productivity taking place on the farms that have been transferred back to people who say they were the original owners?
Yeah, I think it is government that can answer that question. I know that they have some response to that, like the recapitalization program, the Department of Agriculture doing all the work and CAS programs. But I think the issue here is the empowerment of the people that are getting the land. I like the Brazilian model. In Brazil, they train people to use the land even before they do land allocations. It would be instructive for this country to ensure that the people that get the land are the people that are going to use the land. We must skill them and contract with them as a nation so that they make optimal use of the land when it is transferred to them. It cannot only just be the issue of the rights, that the people had their land right in that land, or that we are just balancing the scales. But we must take a deliberate program as a nation to put people in productive agriculture. When the people are on the land, they must be committed and contracted to the use of the land. And we've got a lot to learn from the Afrikaner nation. From 1948, for 10 years, they were playing hide and seek with land allocations, which they gave to many poor white people. But after 10 years, they reflected and they said, we can't keep on playing hide and seek here. Let's get proper farmers. And they did it. You can ask Benny. He knows a number of Afrikaners that have developed, particularly after the 1948 freedom of the Afrikaner nation. We've got a lot to learn from them. So I think as a nation, we need to put people on productive agriculture and support them effectively, just like the Afrikaner nation did.
The other caveat, the elephant in the room in this whole process, is the willing buyer, willing seller principle, which is not in the Constitution, but where does it come from?
This willing buyer, willing seller principle comes from the 1975 Expropriation Act. So it is there. And then it was propagated by the British, particularly when they were dealing with the Zimbabwe program. Of course, they renegated from this. They said through the Lancaster Agreement, they were going to finance land reform in Zimbabwe. When they failed to do so, Zimbabwe decided to do their own program of land reform. The way they did it, it was because the willing buyer, willing seller was failing to work in Zimbabwe because it was not supported financially by Britain. So because of that, they decided on what they did as Zimbabwe. So the willing buyer, willing seller principle will not work unless there is enough capitalization or resourcing of land reform. I think South Africa as a nation needs to learn also. We talk about land reform, but we keep on in our budget putting it less than 2% of the national budget. You can't have a meaningful program of land reform if you do not inject capital into that program. So this program of land reform is still a word of mouth until we have put sufficient resources to support that program. The AU program in Mozambique said 10% of the budget must be allocated to land development, to agriculture. And most of the African governments have not complied to that ruling that there must be 10% of the budget into agriculture. So the same is true with land reform. We can talk about land reform, but as long as it is 1% of our budget, you will never have meaningful land reform program.
Benny, do the farmers support the willing seller, willing buyer, willing seller principle?
Yes, for sure. We haven't got a choice. If we want to create wealth in this country, if we want to create wealth in this country, it is very important that we stick to the principle of private ownership and the free market principles. And that is the principle of the free market. That's the way you fix prices on anything. So if there's somebody brings some produce to the market and there's some buyers, then they will decide what the price be because I'm willing to buy this and I want this, and at the end of the day they fix a price. That's the way the free market principle works. And that is the fair way to do it, because you put this person in a position, if you want to buy his land, that he can go and, with the money he gets, put himself in the same position where he was before this land was taken away from him. So the willing buyer, willing seller process is the only fair way to decide what the price should be. Yes, in the Constitution they stipulate that other things should take into consideration. Say, for example, subsidies you get before. I think that's what Tozy referred to as the grants. That should be deducted. The Constitution stipulated that. In my viewpoint, that was the way the government tried to embrace the agricultural sector, want to lift it up, want to make sure that they have food producers on the table. So, yeah, this is the other way to do things. But the big thing is, we have a decision in South Africa to make. Are we on the road of the private ownership and the free market, or are we on the road of socialism and communism? If it's the latter, we want to make sure that you can go to the previous Soviet Union countries and go and experience what they do have there. And they break out of that, luckily for them. And they say to me, when I talk to a minister, they say they will do anything in their power to get out of a system that they can see our government is trying to get us into. They don't know what your government don't know what they do, because you will create poverty for everyone. We need this country economy to grow. That's the main factor. And every policy announcement, every decision should build trust, confidence, so that people want to invest. That's the way where you start building an economy. And that's my concern about this approach that we have from the government at this stage. They create too much uncertainty, and it's not necessary. We can solve this problem of land ownership on a very efficient way. Let the role players come to the table and we make a decision what will be the best proposal. I'm quite convinced that the one we compiled was very, very good. But there's others as well, and within those role players together, we can solve this thing within a few years and make sure we still have food security, a growing economy, we create wealth, we create opportunities, we address this poverty and unemployment. That's a huge bomb this country is sitting on. And this is not simplistic only about expropriation without compensation. We have to look to the bigger picture as well to make sure that we stabilize South Africa for the future.
But Tosi, where does this new thinking, this new policy of expropriation without compensation leave the act that's been passed in Parliament now, an Amendment Act to the 1975 Expropriation Act you refer to, where does it leave that process?
That expropriation bill has been discussed, but that expropriation bill can only be informed by what is in the Constitution. So what is in the Constitution currently does not talk about expropriation without compensation across the board. So the Constitution must be amended to clarify that it is no compensation across the board. If it is intended for a particular group who got the land as a deed of grants, then so the Constitution must say it. And if the Constitution is going to clarify that those who paid for the land will be paid, then the Constitution must say it. Then the expropriation bill will be informed by what sits in the Constitution. At the moment, the Constitution, section 25(2) says that compensation will be the integral part of expropriation. And further, it details what needs to be considered. But in my view, even if you did not underline no compensation, the section 25 still needed to be amended to bring clarity, because there are so many court cases. Benny is correct, any expropriation will go to court because the current landowners will not take it lying. So in court, the challenge is to have documentation that proves every argument of that expropriation. So if you have no proof that there was a grant, then that will not fly in court, so you will lose it. So government who will implement that new policy will have a challenge to go to court and prove that there is no need to pay.
Benny,
so, and the Constitution must clarify.
Benny, the Agri-SA's Annalise Crosby says during the hearings on the present expropriation bill that is in Parliament presently, obviously there was no expropriation without compensation, but there is an appropriation bill that is in Parliament. And Annalise Crosby of Agri-SA said that expropriation should only be the last resort when negotiations fail. Is that what the TAU also agrees on?
Yes, for sure, we can go with that point, because you know there's a way to interact between people. You can do it on a manner of discuss it around the table and see what's the best solution for the situation, or you can go the confrontational road, and that's not the way to do things. And that is a concern for us, is that we have to stabilize this economy. We have to bring confidence back to the people, from national as well as international. If we are not going to do that, there's no way we will get growth back to this country. So that's the same if you arrest somebody and put him in jail to take him to court. That's a last resort that you have to do. There's other means as well to get him in court. And this is the same with this. I don't think that's the starting point. That should be the last point. But I think that we have to go and sit down with government And I'm thankful that Mr. Ramaphosa mentioned that they want to hold a land conference. I just hope that we have a fair play and role to play there, that we can bring the proposals to the table that will have success, that makes sure that the new entry farmers will have a success story after a few years and not failures as we experience now. And that's our purpose in life. As an organization, we have one goal, and that is to keep commercial farmers in production safe on their farms on a profitable manner, so that they can produce food next year and the year after that as well. That is the biggest stabilization factor in any country. And we have to make sure, all the role players, that if they make an announcement, or they make a decision, or they bring some new legislation to the table, that they will apply to that to make sure that we are not going to break down food security, that we grow the economy, that the agricultural sector can play the role in job creation, stabilize the rural areas. There's so many positive things that the agricultural sector can do, but then we need a chance to do that, not uncertainty as we experience now.
Well, if you'd like to join us in today's discussion, you can tweet us at Rights and Recourse. You can email your thoughts to rightsandrecourse@sabc.co.za. Stay with us. Welcome back to Rights and Recourse as we discuss expropriation of land without compensation with Thozamile Gwanya, former Director General of the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform, and also Director of the Land Commission, National Land Commission, and Mr. Benny van Zyl, Chief Executive of the Transvaal Agricultural Union. Well, the question I wanted to ask Butozi, probably could you explain to us what was the roles played by the courts in the transfer of land or in the redistribution and restitution program of land?
Yeah, the courts are playing a very important role. They have assisted and enabled the parties that may not be in agreement to agree and to rule on those matters. This is true with both restitution cases, with land redistribution cases, as well as with land tenure, which dealt with most of the farm workers. In this particular case, the courts are guided by the provisions of the laws that are the land laws that are applicable. one of the challenges that has come was on the issue of determining the market price, whether it's expropriation or other land reform programs. Most landowners will want the highest price possible. If the farm is 2 million, you will get 3 valuations, and these 3 valuations will give you 3 different land prices for the same land parcel without any changes. One valuation will be 2 million, the other will be 7 million, the other one will be 10 million. So the landowner will insist on 10 million, and the government which is buying the land will insist on 2 million for the same property. And I have seen it that in the courts, sometimes the one who argues best is the 10 million advocate. And then the court decides on granting that 10 million. And the government argument for 2 million maybe become weaker, and it ends up the award of the court being 10 million. This is the problem that we are sitting in. And one land claims court president said, valuation is not an exact science. So you cannot come and say the land price is 2 million.
It goes both ways, isn't it?
You must accept the arguments that are put. Yeah. So the challenge then has been that this market price, it is important that it must be stated how you arrive at it, and I think it must go into the law. What land price ceilings are going to be, so that there is no big argument far above this market price.
Benny, why don't we have a situation where we've seen this happen on the winelands in Stellenbosch, where a farmer got together with his employees and they sat down and they agreed, this is how we're going to work the land, this is how we're going to divide what comes out of the land. Why don't farmers do that? It will be good for them.
No, this is about the capacity of a farm. It goes about economy of scale. Way back when this whole BEE process started, we asked from TAU side that the whole process should be taken to an independent institution and ask them to make a study what will be the impact be if we implement those thresholds on the farms. And it was quite clear for us that there's not very much farms that can apply that within the present capacity. The feedback that we get after we asked a university to do a study for us was that 70% of South Africa's farmers cannot apply BEE because they don't have the capacity to do that. They will go bankrupt. And what will be the reality if that happens? Because you, at that stage, it was about 30% that you help these farm workers to bring them on board. But if the whole package go bankrupt, what did you gain out of this? It's not for the benefit of nobody. So that's not for the medium scale and the smaller scale commercial farmers a proposal that they can even consider because they don't have the capacity. Yes, your big companies and the big corporates, they perhaps have the capacity to do something like that, and they do that. So it's about, at the end of the day, will you still be profitable? That's the baseline for any farmer. You have to make sure his business will still be running next year. And if you have to bring other role players that want to benefit out of his capacity, his entrepreneurship, and he haven't got the gain out of it himself and he go bankrupt, that's not for the benefit of nobody. And I think that's the main reason why people cannot consider it. It's not possible for them.
Tosi, during the discussions, the public discussions around the present expropriation bill, Parliament's legal advisor reminded the Portfolio Committee that Section 25, subsection 2 of the Constitution states that, subsection 2B, states that if parties do not agree on compensation, they should approach a court. The people cannot afford the route of going to court. So the Land Commission should take up the people's burden and take that issue to court. Is that what is happening?
Yes, it has happened. The restitution legislation provides for support to land reform beneficiaries who are taking the matter to court. So indeed, that is happening. They can take the matter to court. So I'm just saying that the expropriation whilst it can fast track land reform, it will still be faced with a lot of litigation.
In another quote from a book by a Ghanaian-born American scholar, Benedict Atuahene, we want what is ours. She quotes you exactly, say, Mr. Gwanya, as former Director General of the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform, you are quoted as having said, the fatal flaw of the court process as implemented was that it slowed down the Commission's ability to finalize claims. Is that what the slowing down is? Is it one of the reasons why the slowing down is? Somebody else were pointed to corruption, somebody pointed to incompetence in the department or in the National Land Commission. Are these things happening? Are these the things that are holding us back in this issue? Some of the things that are holding us back?
No, I don't want to say that the courts are delaying the process necessarily, but by their very nature, they are slow processes because we've got to prove so many things before the matter can be resolved. So the comment was based on comparing the administrative approach where you get the landowner as well as the land reform beneficiaries to agree on a formula. We have settled many land claims on the basis of the administrative approach through Section 42D of the Restitution Act, where the minister takes the agreements of the parties concerned as the finalization of that claim. So instead of going through the protracted land court processes, these parties will agree if they agree on that. So that tends to be much faster. But with expropriation, you would have to go to the court. It must be turned into an order.
Well, we will continue to discuss this topic for a long time to come. It's not going to end here. It's a topic that all of us will still be talking about as time goes on. In its report for the Sustainable Institute, Ernst & Young says much has been done to transform land ownership since 1994, most of which has taken outside of the mainstream reform process. For its part, the state-led process of reform has charted a remarkable balanced course given our history and the conflicted demands being made on it. In spite of all of this, only about a quarter of the target set for transfer in 1994 has been reached, and much more of the farmland transferred is also optimally productive. Clearly, much remains to be done, but how do we do it? Creating a sense of justice is productive, but how many jobs or kilograms of maize is justice worth? A full stomach might say justice is worth the word's weight in grain, but to those starving, the answer is likely to be different. The question could always be, and it still remains, is expropriation without compensation worth it? You be the judge. This has been Rights and Recourse. This program is repeated on 5 on Monday morning from all of us in the studio. Thank you very much to our guests, and goodbye.